green theme presentation. Delighted to have LeRoy Harvey, our recycling and energy coordinator for the township, join us this evening. We're always looking to keep up with what's going on in recycling and energy. We get regular updates on the energy team, but we don't always hear as much about recycling as we'd like to, so take it away, LeRoy.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you all here. Appreciate working with you and the official capacity that you have to move some of these initiatives forward. Thank you, Harmony. I'm grateful that Harmony's on our staff now. We worked pretty closely together on the Mid-Michigan Program for Greater Sustainability over actually it was 4 years if you include the grant application, and maybe 5 if the failed application. So we also worked together in grad school at the Center for Urban Affairs on unrelated projects, but it's great that you have her as a resource and the township has her as a resource as well to assist with your efforts. I thought I'd just give a kind of an overview of some of the things that I've been involved with, and there may be some overlap, and I'm more comfortable at a table like this where we're just having a conversation. So if you wouldn't mind moving over, no, just kidding. But in the future, I hope we continue this conversation in a more conversational style. And we've talked. Well, I've talked with some of you over the last few weeks, and I enjoy the conversations. Always learn something. If I can figure out how to use this computer. We do have a Meridian Energy team, as you know. I'm grateful that John represents that on your group here. We're an informal group, and we're open to anybody. You are welcome to come to our meetings. We meet once a month, and we talk about energy initiatives. We were formed in 2007, partly at the suggestion of one of our team members, Judy Kindle, that the township sign on to the mayor's climate change agreement. And we were established to sort of see that through. And we've remained in existence since then. And we have some kind of interesting new initiatives underway. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the biggest energy users in the township. Some of this may not be a big mystery to you, but there's some obvious ones like this building, and then there's some less obvious ones like the pumps that pump water uphill to East Lansing, and then there's the energy that's expended processing our wastewater in East Lansing that we really don't see that energy bill on a monthly basis, but based on the amount of water that we pump uphill, it's and the amount we pay for water, it's a fairly significant chunk of change. There's also the street lights that the township doesn't directly pay, but assesses neighborhoods to pay, and that includes the maintenance of the street lights. But that equals about more than $250,000 a year that is shelled out by residents to pay for those street lights. Some are not very energy efficient. And then there's, of course, the embodied energy that goes into our buildings and the things that we purchase, the paper that we recycle. And I see a little typo here. I'm not sure what D means, but maybe we'll be in for a surprise here. Can you see this? I'm going to pass out the slides, and I'll send you a link to the presentation so you can actually see what's on the screen. But the biggest energy users in our buildings are the heating and cooling and the lighting. Not quite yet. That's but you can save that for afterwards. You can't, it's even less legible on that handout, otherwise I would give you the handout. But the lighting is probably the biggest energy user in this building. And then the heating and cooling, there's lesser energy used for things like computers, electronic devices, and things like that. We also use quite a bit of energy in our vehicle fleet. we use almost as much as we do in our buildings, just gassing up our vehicles, our trucks, snow plows, police cars, that type of thing. This little chart, you can see that the municipal building, this biggest slice of the pie in blue, is our biggest energy user in terms of our buildings. Next to that is the service center and public safety building, and then the pumps that pump water to and from the township, the lift stations. This little chart shows the difference. We actually use more, in terms of energy, BTUs, we actually use more natural gas than we use electricity. But if you equate kilowatt hours to BTUs, we pay quite a bit more for electricity. So electricity costs about $38 per million BTUs, whereas natural gas is only about $7 per million BTUs. So the electricity is really the biggest expense, but natural gas is a largest part in terms of quantity of energy. We get a bigger bang for the buck if we can use natural gas. Like in your home, if you're heating with your water with electricity, it's going to cost you about 3 times as much than if you're heated with natural gas, for example. Even if you have a high efficiency electric water heater. Several years ago, we went through a major, we call it Phase 1 energy improvements, and that was partially supported by the Community Development Block Grant funds. And we did things like lighting replacements, and we've talked about this before, I reported on that, but that was Phase 1. We are now sort of into Phase 2. We wouldn't have been into Phase 2 if we hadn't captured a portion of the energy savings from those energy improvements. During the last 7 years, we've saved about $250,000 in energy use, which is equivalent to about 1 year's energy expenses for our buildings and our pumps. And we've captured a portion of that. About 80% of the savings went back into an energy fund, and we're using that money to invest in more energy efficiency improvements. Now, if we wanted to, we could take money from our capital improvement funds and also invest that into energy if we wanted to. But we captured the energy savings, and we created this revolving energy fund, and over the past 6 years, saved about $250,000. In tracking these energy savings, we've also been able to pinpoint errors in our utility billing. For example, we were paying sales tax. I found we were paying sales tax on some accounts. Just at the end of last year, we got a $13,000 bill for an abandoned building, the North Fire Station, and it was just a faulty meter reading. But when you're sorting through 80 bills a month, it's hard to see that if you're not tracking it. And we were able to find that through the monitoring that we've been doing, and we got a check returned from consumers for about $13,000. Turns out that consumers' energy is hopefully looking at their billing practices, because their estimating of energy bills is come under a little bit of scrutiny, as mistakes like this can happen, and it's an issue for customers like us that have so many bills. So it pays to take a look at what's going on. Recently, you may have noticed the LED lighting in the parking lot. The fire station also has some energy improvements embodied into it. We're going to be getting some rebates from the utilities for those energy improvements. And then we're underway with our Phase 2 energy audit, and we've identified quite a few different opportunities. unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges is that this old heating system is a big monster, and we have to do an energy and engineering study just to figure out how we can retrofit this monstrosity. But once that's complete, we'll be able to proceed with some of, hopefully, some higher efficiency equipment. Phase 2 also included a look at the streetlights, and we've got a lot of energy, mercury vapor lamps, high pressure sodium, LED lighting is really taken off, and we have an opportunity to save probably half or more of the energy use just through some retrofitting. But working with the utility to do that is a challenge, and we haven't figured out exactly what the best plan of action is, but we might need your help on that one. We've also did a photovoltaic demonstration at Harris Nature Center. We've been looking into community solar, and John's been updating you on some of the latest presentations that Board of Water and Light and consumers have done for our board. And last night we were hoping to get the go-ahead, the green light, so to speak, to purchase 5 or at least 5 panels at the Board of Water and Light system, just over there on the abandoned landfill at the border of East Lansing and Meridian Township. We've also been discussing how we can embed energy thinking into the master plan, and worked with the state of Michigan to look at a statewide study on community energy management practices. They've compiled a nice report that's helpful for communities, and then for doing things like this climate sustainability plan that John mentioned and has been helping with. He and one of the other members of the team have come up with an initial rough draft that we're looking for others to weigh in on. It's kind of hard to separate energy, as you know, the environment from all the things that we do. And it's related to the master plan. It's also related to the facilities management, purchasing policies. Hopefully it's related to this branding initiative where we're looking at what does Meridian stand for. And of course we value our environment as one of the key things of why we live here and do business here. So we're hoping that that branding initiative, which, have you heard about the branding initiative yet? It's kind of a new initiative. They're going to be holding some focus groups and then get public involvement to talk about what attracts people and keeps people in the township, and how do we put that message out there better to people. One of the things that the Mid-Michigan Programs for Sustainability did was a sustainability assessment. Now I know that went to the Planning Commission, but it might be something that could also be useful to you as you think about how do we move sustainability forward in what are the gaps and what are some things that we can do to further sustainability on the whole. Have you seen the sustainability assessment results? Does that ring a bell? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we've been talking about this as a team and trying to come up with some sense of how to move forward. And the climate action plan seems like to be an achievable goal, maybe a nice next step, especially since we have some models like East Lansing. Lansing is working on something similar. Kalamazoo has done this. Grand Rapids has a sustainability plan. And we also have this study that the state has done on community energy management. I'll send you these links, and there's just a lot of resources that are available to us. How much time do I have, by the way? I didn't actually time this presentation. I want to make sure I'm not going to keep you too long.
Okay. We'll flag you when you're...
Okay.
But I'm interested to hear what the climate sustainability plan is.
Me too. If we look at East Lansing as an example, and again, John John and Roger on our energy team have done more work on this than I have. But there's typical components that you look at: efficiency, renewables, waste and materials, transportation, water, and then the other components like education and outreach and that type of thing. John, do you want to say anything more than that at this point?
Well, I think our discussions have been kind of preliminary, right, at the energy team, and Roger and I had a good discussion the other day, but it's still kind of preliminary. But I think your last statement there, open to collaboration, is important. Like I had mentioned earlier, really, the Environmental Commission, Planning Department, Public Works, we all need to be involved. And one idea that was thrown out too was that there's been discussion that we probably need to have some sort of public forums to get input from the township residents and organizations related to these various elements, and that the Environmental Commission may want to use one or more of our green theme opportunities for some of these public forums. For example, maybe because we already kind of have the schedule set up, and obviously it fits within our overall kind of mission, everything that's being talked about here. So that was one idea that was thrown out, that how the Environmental Commission could be helpful is just to have a series of forums here where we invite people from the community and organizations to kind of just give us some input. If we're going to develop a plan, what do you think should be in it?
Right.
Yep.
And that might be someone from another municipality that has developed a
Oh, sure,
climate action plan.
sure. Could be, and it would be at
Maybe a
least
shorter one.
you're right, exactly. And we would want it to provide an opportunity for any interested citizen and group to come and give us some feedback or input, so it wouldn't be just one speaker, but hopefully multiple people kind of giving us some ideas and suggestions.
Okay.
Just that's a thought that's being thrown around.
We do have some experts in our community. I'm pretty sure John Warbach still lives in the township. He's written for Planning and Zoning News and has done a lot of research. Might be one of the potential speaker.
So all of these bullet points that are listed here, for example, transportation, would be addressed as they relate to climate change.
I think that's part of the idea.
So can you is there an example from a plan from another municipality from any of those? I mean, how that would directly relate to the climate?
Well, one of the nice things about tracking our energy use over the last half a decade or so is that we can turn those BTUs into CO2 avoided or
okay.
CO2 produced, and we can look at what's creating the most impact and where have we achieved the most savings. We can do that similarly for liquid fuels like diesel and gasoline and biodiesel and things like that. For materials, there are some kind of general rules of thumb in terms of if you recycle X amount, how much CO2 is reduced. A lot of those are fairly general, but they give a sense or indicator of what the impact is.
Good. Thank you.
So that's, again, it's sort of in its infancy, but we thought it might be a bite-sized project for our energy team that we could put out there and then offer, learn about it, get input from people, and maybe get some creative public involvement. I want to briefly talk about recycling because I know some of you are interested in that, and we've got a lot of stuff coming up. I'll pass around also a list of regional events that are happening. With Harvey's help. I guess you can wait for that if you like. We do tend to work with other regional recycling coordinators to do events like Recycle-Rama. Meridian Township is a sponsor of that. So there's some things that we can do as a region that are harder to do as an individual community. Like they're doing electronics recycling at the Recycle-Rama, and that's going to cost about $10,000 or $15,000 to pull that off. But regionally, we can pool our resources and accomplish what we can't really do it as a township. We also did a study. Meridian contributed $1,000 to a regional study of a potential transfer station or processing facility, because right now our recyclables go about 50 to 80 miles just to be processed, and from there they're shipped all around the world. And the price of recyclables has gone down. With the price of energy going down, the markets aren't what they used to be. So, to the extent we can collaborate regionally on a processing facility or a transfer station, we have the potential to save some money. We can deal with it here in our community. So that was a pretty extensive study that involved students as well as about 7 different communities. And we're also doing a home and garden show booth. I think we're booth 1271. That's a good place to learn about home improvements and landscaping opportunities, as well as recycling and other things like rainwater collection. And the state of Michigan is offering some money to help communities put more carts, recycling carts, the big 90, 100-gallon containers. So we're looking at potentially applying for one of those. Granger's also proposed doing in Meridian what they've done in Delhi Township and in Delta Township, saying as long as you don't hire one contractor and eliminate the free market, we'll offer free recycling carts to all of your residents or all of their customers in your community. That seems like a fairly appealing offer. And we're going to take a close look at that. There's a meeting next, I think it's March 15th, to talk about that. There's some downsides to that too. It might affect our ability to collaborate regionally on something that might disrupt the free market system. And then there's the issue of multifamily recycling, which is a kind of a hard nut to crack. But there are several apartment buildings that are offering recycling right now, and we might be able to use some of this grant funds to distribute carts to multifamily housing. So if we can pull that together, the challenge is we have to come up with a 50% match. So we are hoping Granger might want to do that, but right now it's very expensive to recycle, and they're getting into it partly because the public is demanding it. But do we have to come up with an ordinance that requires people to recycle in apartments? That might be an option to consider too. This is our recycling event on April 23rd at Chippewa Middle School. And we're hoping to recycle mattresses, box springs, bicycles, scrap metal. Bicycles, Lenny? Lenny's been a regular volunteer. Collected hundreds of bicycles over the last few years, thanks to efforts like his. Scrap metal, tires is a new one, and some household items that would be taken by a place like Salvation Army or Goodwill. We're also going to be doing paint, and just found that out today. And then there's Recycle-Rama, and Harmony has some of the links to this information. The reason the state is offering grants for carts is because in most communities that get carts, recycling goes up about 40% in residential. It's a really quick way to boost recycling. You can also reduce the number of trips. Already we have recycling once every 2 weeks. But as you see, bins in neighborhoods, they get overflowing, blowing around, and it's more convenience. Right now it costs an extra $1.50 a month if you want to get a cart, and If we go with Granger's proposal, they would eliminate that charge. Been looking a little bit at recycling ordinances, and there's some stuff that I've got on our website we might consider at some point. Open to talking a little bit more about that if you like. And these are some of the apartment complexes that already have recycling, partly because their residents have demanded it, partly because it's just it seems like something that everyone should have access to, and managers are starting to get a clue about that. They also realize how much they pay on trash, so it can save them on trash as well if people do it right. As I mentioned, or Bill mentioned, try and keep people informed of the Green Gazette. If you don't look at that, it's a good place to find out about some of the other environmental initiatives and to share projects. If you've got a topic that you'd like to share with the 600 voluntary subscribers to this around the township, I'd be interested in your news stories or just little tidbits that you would like to share. And I can put that in the Green Gazette, which I have to go work on when I'm done here because it's late this month. And then the web page is also a good tool to find out about things like community gardens or water conservation strategies or the latest recycling events. Any questions or comments?
Well, I've got a bunch, but you go ahead.
One about the recycling, LeRoy, I look down my street, it seems like a lot of people with Granger are recycling, but not everybody. Do we know what percentage of residences participate recycling with Granger?
Granger keeps their numbers pretty close to their chest, so to speak. But they're estimating, I believe it's about 64% of people have requested bins. That doesn't mean they use them every week.
Okay.
But 64% of eligible customers. And most of the households use Granger for their waste hauler.
Right. And would you, from your knowledge of what other communities are doing, is 64% pretty good? Or how would you?
That seems pretty high, but
Okay.
But again, it's fairly sporadic, and the convenience is not what it could be. If everyone had carts, they'd probably put more in them.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot. You could put most paper products, most plastic, and in some communities even glass. That would be added to the list in Meridian if we go with this agreement. So that's a good question. It seems relatively high, but on the whole, Michigan is pretty low at recycling all that it can. There's still a lot in the commercial sector and institutional sector that does not get recycled.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think another advantage of the carts is that it may prevent recyclables from blowing all over the neighborhood, which seems to happen every time. I know I don't have a cart, so I have to put my recyclables out just before the Granger truck appears. Otherwise, on a windy day, I know they're going to be blowing all over. So
Yeah.
carts are a great idea.
I would recommend it. Found them quite useful. They are a little larger, and not everyone has a place to put them.
Yeah.
But they are convenient and easier to carry around than the tubs too. So, yeah.
Could you explain the Ranger proposal? It sounded to me like they were willing to put something up as long as they were not the sole provider?
Well, a lot of communities go to a sole provider because there's issues with 3 or 4 trucks coming down the street every year. We don't have as much of that in Meridian because Granger has a corner on the market. It's not economical for a lot of other waste haulers to compete in Meridian Township, because they have to go so far to the next customer. It's just, there's an economy of scale. So if Granger wants to keep that,
That's
and
what
they
I
think
thought. It
by-
sounded like they were asking for just the opposite.
well, they don't want Meridian to go out to bid and saying, we're gonna have one provider. So Waste Management, Granger, let's see your bids. And a big company like Waste Management, that's a multinational corporation, can come in and underbid a local person. And they're worried that that type of thing might happen if we decide that we want to go with that. So that's my
Granger is
understanding of it. I
they
could be
are
wrong.
watching out for themselves.
Yeah, it's to
It
their
sounded,
benefit.
it sounded just the opposite when I first heard it.
Yeah,
It
it's
sounds
a
like
little.
they're protecting their ability to compete on a
Oh, yeah,
level playing field.
yeah.
How I would. When you give the 64% number, you're basically talking, when you say eligible customers, those are gonna largely be the sort of single-family residence customer?
Well, all the Granger customers are eligible, as long as there's up to 4-unit, single-family type homes. If those are the 64% is those that have requested a bin,
Okay.
and so they have a bin ideally in their possession, and they could recycle. That doesn't mean they recycle. There's nothing to do about the quantity that they recycle.
And can you estimate, or do you know the number of township residents that would kind of be in that eligible customer group? Is that a third of the township? Is that a
That's what-
half or 2/3 or?
That's one of the numbers that that Granger hasn't released readily. We could probably come up with an approximation if we took, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but if we took X number of 1 to 4 unit dwelling units, multiplied maybe by 80%, and then took 64% of that.
I've heard figures in the past that something around half of the township's population is in high-density residential units. Does that sound about right
I think it's
to
a little
you?
less than that, but yeah, it's a large percentage.
So the way I'm reading this is that about half of our residents are eligible, and something like 2/3 of those have at least requested a bin, so we think
Mhm.
they're potentially participating. So it sounds good to have 2/3 of the people who could be participating
Mhm.
doing so, but the other half is that we have a large number of our residents who aren't eligible.
Exactly.
And you gave a list of apartment buildings that are participating. I'm guessing that is a fairly small subset of the possible
Yeah.
participants.
Yeah, that's correct.
And one of the reasons I asked that is that I was asked recently by one of our township trustees whose son lives in an apartment building, and he was surprised to learn that recycling wasn't available in that apartment complex, and was curious what would have to happen in order for that to change. And from what you said earlier, it sounds like that's a decision that's going to be made by the owner or the manager of the complex, and that the factors they're going to take into account are whether they've got the space and how much it's going to cost, and whether it's going to reduce the fees that they're spending for landfill, stream, but that there might be some incentive programs out there that the township could help with to help defray those costs. Have I got it about
Yeah.
right?
Yes. And one of the nice things about the carts too is that they can serve the carts with their residential curbside pickup. So in an apartment building, if you have carts around your complex, the same truck that serves that residential route can come by. And you can also start with a small number, and then as participation grows, you can add carts relatively easily, as we've done here at the township. So you can scale up and scale down a program. And they're fairly portable, so you can decentralize your collection points So that's fairly recent development, but that makes it a little bit more probable that maybe we could pull something off.
So it seems like the ideal way of increasing participation in the multifamily programs is to have the residents speaking with their management and encouraging them to contact either Granger or you for additional information. Is that?
Yeah, Granger's not the only commercial provider. Waste Management also has recycling options, and there may be others that I'm not aware of. But yes, that's one individual can make a big difference in a large apartment complex.
Right.
And getting together and offering to help put together a program is even better, because there's a lot of education and there's a lot of turnover in apartments. It just make for some easy headaches to occur. It's one of the reasons why management doesn't want to get into it. But there's also more options available today that there weren't. The single stream makes it easy. You don't have to sort stuff and have 8 containers for each item. So the single stream combined with the carts make it a fairly timely thing for us to be considering.
If I could go back to your energy topics for just a moment. I've heard this figure before of $250,000 saved, and every time I hear it, it's still amazing to me. We hear a lot in our political discourse, especially at the national level, about finding money to spend on things that we want to spend money on by cutting out waste. And that always sounds great, but you kind of wonder, where is it going to happen? And here we have a local case where by sitting down and poring over the numbers, you figure out ways to save money, and that money saved can be funneled back into something that you want to do more of. And that just seems like an excellent example of how you actually go after inefficiencies and in a way that helps everybody. You talked about for example, the heating unit on this building and lighting and a couple other things. One of the big wedges in your chart was the vehicle fleet. The fuel that we put into township vehicles that keep our roads and keep the snow off our pathways and all of that stuff. Any glimmers of hope in ways that energy consumed by the vehicle fleet can be reduced?
Well, a few years ago, we worked with the Greater Lansing Clean Cities to identify some grant money for electric charging station. It turned out to cost quite a bit to run an electric line from one side of the building to the other, but we did find the local theater had already wired their system to accommodate it. They were just looking for a meter or a charging station. So that's where it is, and they let people use it. But certainly the hybrids and the electric vehicles, the propane vehicles, it seems like something we should be experimenting with, learning with. But someone like Dennis Antone, who's busy doing 4 different things, manning the graveyards and dealing with the fleet and the grounds, to introduce a new idea that's going to require unknown mechanical challenges is not necessarily the first thing on his priority list. So, but he has been fairly innovative in some cases when it's easy to do, like using biodiesel. We were able to use B20 in our diesel vehicles, and I'm not sure how much we're using right now, but there's alternative fuels, there's higher efficiency equipment. Other communities are doing a lot with that, but energy efficiency is not always the priority, and say the police cruiser that accommodates all the equipment that they currently use might be more of a priority than how many miles per gallon they get.
Sure.
But there's lots of opportunities out there. And the Greater Lansing Clean Cities Initiative, which we've been a member of, is one source of those ideas. They would be a good person to do a green theme presentation.
Great. Maybe we have one last question, Don?
Yes, Regarding, you mentioned the use of hybrid or maybe all-electric vehicles, but you previously said that electricity is much more expensive than natural gas. Does that same comparison work when you look at other fossil fuels, gasoline, diesel, and so forth? In other words, what I'm getting at, I mean, there's a CO2 issue too with fossil fuels, but just from an expense standpoint, are electric vehicles really that much more cost-effective than vehicles that burn fossil fuel, given the high cost of electricity?
Yes and no. I mean, part of it depends on when you charge your vehicle. I mean, there's a lot of energy that is wasted just keeping the coal-fired plants or the nuclear plants or the gas plants up to generating capacity at nighttime when that energy is not being used. So if we can charge at nighttime, there's an economy that occurs with that. We don't have time of use rates right now, and that's something that is going to be coming, and I think Pat Hudson is maybe going to speak to that at the workshop that John mentioned on the smart grid. So if we can have charging that occurs during off-peak times, it's a much more efficient use of the electricity. If you don't have any indicators, price signals that tell you when it's more efficient, you're less likely to take advantage of that opportunity. But I'm not an expert on electric vehicles to compare, what's the embodied energy in the batteries, but the fuel economy is certainly dramatic, and I wish I could answer that. I'm sure that someone from the Clean Cities Initiative could give you a better answer than I can.
Roy, I assume I'm correct in that fuel efficiency is kind of a consideration in purchasing vehicles. It's kind of probably township policy. Of course, price of gasoline is really cheap now, but
Yeah.
is that an accurate statement, or?
That's my understanding,
Yeah.
as far as what the priority is on all the other
It's one of many
priorities.
factors
Yeah,
that would be
Yeah.
considered in what type of vehicle to purchase, and, okay, yeah.
yeah. I get 700 miles a gallon on my vehicle,
Oh,
equivalent,
yeah,
when I ride my bike to work. But
Right.
on this weather, I just can't do it.
right. And you don't have to chase speeders, right, right.
We do have a bike lending program here, which is open to volunteers and staff. So if any of you want to, when the bikes are available, you're welcome to use them. If you
ride home this evening, you're
Oh, great, great.
have to fill up the tires.
All right, well, thank you very much for that very informative presentation. It's wonderful that the township has got someone like you doing this stuff, paying attention to stuff, keeping us up to date, and giving us options and ideas.
Thanks for inviting me, and I do hope we continue to talk about these options. And so glad that Harmony and John are serving as delegates and for our efforts. Thank you.
Great, thank you.